Let's go right over here to a young man who picks a guitar like nobody we've ever heard. Mr. Guitar himself, Chester Atkins, right here.
Chet Atkins is arguably one of the most influential men in Nashville music history. A songwriter, producer, and most famously, the original CGP, certified guitar player. So it's a little surprising that there hasn't been a standalone biography about Chet's life until now. Don Cusic spent more than a decade working on the new book, Chet Atkins, Mr. Guitar. Don's been writing about music for decades, including books about Roger Miller, Gene Autry, cowboys, and baseball. Before we get to my conversation with Don, though, here's a little taste of how Chet Atkins earned his nickname. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. It's Banner and Company. You have written, about several Mount Rushmores of music.
Mm-hmm.
I was really surprised to hear that there was no definitive book on Chet Atkins.
No, there's not. Now, he did an autobiography that came out mid-70s, 76, 75, long in there. And then he did another book called Me and My Guitars, where it's kind of a picture book of the guitars he had and a little background on each. But that was it.
If I'm correct, he comes from the same little small town as Kenny Chesney.
Yeah. Whose name I've forgotten at the moment. What is the name of that town?
Luttrell, isn't it?
Yeah, Luttrell. Yeah, in fact, I went up there. It's not much anymore. It's pretty run down. But yeah, his place, where he grew up, or partly grew up, is still around, still a farm.
Sort of a bleak and unhappy childhood.
He had asthma, so physically it was tough. And then he had a dad who kept getting married. I think he had 5 wives. So anyway, so the dad left him. The mom and dad were not getting along, and the dad left him. And then he would come back to visit now and then. And one of the defining moments of Chet Atkins' life is that his father promised him a fiddle. He actually started playing the fiddle, and that he would bring him a fiddle. And when he came back, well, he gave his daughter a guitar, I think, and he took the fiddle with him. And so here was a kid that was promised a fiddle, and it didn't get delivered, and it haunted him his entire life.
Why is it that so many players that are known for guitar later start on fiddle? I mean, Merle Haggard and Roger Miller and Sam Bush plays great fiddle, Ricky Skaggs.
Well, you got to remember, the fiddle is the most versatile instrument, or was in the early part of the 20th century. You get a fiddler, they could play for a dance. And why do you have music? You have music to dance by. So you roll up the rugs and you go at it with a fiddle. And so you could pretty much accompany yourself on the fiddle. It would be loud enough. So it was and it was small.
Portable.
If you talk about going the Oregon Trail or something, it's easier to put a fiddle in there than it is a guitar. But that was a backbone of country music, the fiddlers.
How did Chet get his first guitar? And it was kind of a clunker.
It was a real clunker. Silvertone came out of Sears and Roebuck. His father had it, or his stepfather had it rather, and he made a bargain that he would milk cows for his brother, because his brother, I think, can't remember, his brother had it or his father had it, and traded it for a gun and all that. So yeah, it was bad. He didn't get a real good fiddle until he got on the radio in Knoxville, and even then it was borrowed. He borrowed from his brothers, and his fiddle. He had an uncle and got him a fiddle. Chet's brother. Chet's father's brother got him a fiddle.
So how long did he fiddle before he just set that aside and said, I'm a guitar player through and through?
He never set it aside. He played the fiddle his whole life.
Wow.
Now, he didn't record playing the fiddle, but he played the fiddle his whole life. He was a musician's musician. So when he first got his first job on WNOX with Knoxville, he got it as a fiddle player, backing up Archie Campbell and I can't remember the other guy's name.
Bill Carlisle.
Bill Carlisle, yes. Jumping Bill Carlisle used to play the Opry.
Yep. And he still would jump with his walker.
And then he'd throw it on his shoulder and walk out.
Chet, though, really invented a whole new way to play.
Yes.
And how did that come about?
Well, it came about because he heard, well, first of all, he's playing the guitar all the time, practicing, and he's trying to get a sound that's different. And on the radio, at night, the AM airwaves bounce off the ionosphere. So you can pick up, in his case, Cincinnati, living down in Columbus, Georgia. So he picks that up and he hears Merle Travis. And Merle Travis plays with the thumb and one finger. And he plays the thumb on like the tonic. So if you're in C, it's C or C, G. Ding, ding, or ding, dong, ding, dong.
Yeah, the first and the fifth.
Yeah, and then a melody with this finger. What Chet did, because he didn't quite get it right, is he developed a style where the thumb plays, we'll go with open strings, A, D, E, D. A, D, E, D, which is kind of like a stride piano. And then he plays the melody with three fingers. So he can do a lot more. He's very influential as a guitar player, except not very many play but like Chet Atkins, because it's a limited style. It's an individualist style. And a session player has to play for whoever walks in the door. Mm-hmm. So in a way, if you want to ask me about how influential he was influential more as a person than he was really as a guitar player.
When he was trying to eke out this new style, though, mm-hmm. and make the guitar sound like more than one instrument, he was doing some clever stuff. Mm-hmm. You write in the book how he made his own thumb pick.
Yeah. Yes, he did, and took an old toothbrush thing and melted it down, and he was a tinkerer. He liked electronics. He liked messing with stuff, radios and things like that. So he was always doing something kind of unique. And of course, when musicians talk, when artists talk, they talk about light. When musicians talk, they talk about sound. And so being a musician, he's looking for a certain sound, and he got it.
It was really his brother, though, who kind of struck it big, if mm-hmm. you want to call that mm-hmm. big. He got out of East Tennessee and was up on the radio.
Yeah. He got sent to Nebraska, where Chet's uncle lived. And he did that because Chet's father wanted him to get a good education. And he could get a better education out there. Well, when he gets out to Nebraska, people discover, well, first of all, his uncle discovers that he can play and has him audition for a radio station. He gets on the radio station. He ends up, and of course, a lot of people don't realize, in country music, Chicago was the big place for a long time, up to World War II. It wasn't Nashville.
Correct.
Nashville was big, but it wasn't Chicago. He gets on Chicago, WLS, the National Barn Dance, meets up with Les Paul, meets up with Ernie Newton, who's a bass player. Newton becomes a studio musician here in Nashville. Of course, Les Paul goes on to big fame. And his brother could sing just like Bing Crosby. He had that sound like Bing Crosby. And Chet could hear him on the radio because he was on the network. And he was just, that was his big hero. And the brother made some phone calls for him along the way when Chet kept getting fired at radio stations. And his brother helped him, made a phone call or two, because his brother was the big star at that time.
But was the brother aware that Chet's talent would eclipse his own? Well,
he became aware of it.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think it was the big brother encouraging the younger brother more than anything and trying to help him out. I don't think he realized. And then, of course, his brother wanted him to move to New York and play jazz, because jazz is the musician's music. If you're a real musician, you play jazz. And Chet, he was a country boy. He wanted to stay country.
He was also listening to the radio like a fiend, right?
Mm-hmm. He of course, he goes up in East Tennessee. Up until he was about 10 or 12, 13, long in there somewhere, when his asthma was so bad that his mother called the ex-husband, his father, and said, "You got to take him to Georgia because he's going to die here." Chet could only sit up. He couldn't lay down and go to sleep. And so they took him down to Columbus, Georgia, which is really where he developed his style. And of course, the asthma was better there. The land was better there. The income was better there. So it was very fortunate that he got out of East Tennessee. He might never have been Chet Atkins.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kalodimos. We'll be right back.
Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. 9.5 plus pH, now in cans.
Refreshing.
Made for every way you move.
Should I run a marathon?
Let's start with finishing that water. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant, now in a sleek can. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
So he gets to Nashville in 1946.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in Music City? Or is it much of a music city?
The one thing I discovered, and I discovered with another book I wrote called Nashville Sounds, which is a timeline, pictorial history, is that at the end of World War II, there wasn't a single recording studio or record company in town. There were studios in radio stations, and what happened in '46. Actually, the end of 45 is when it begins, but in 46, a guy named Jim Boulay, he looks like Bullet. If you're an American, if you're French, it's Boulay. Started a record company, Bullet Records, and then 3 WSM engineers started a recording studio, because they had been using the WSM studios, and it got to the point they had to get out of there. When somebody pays you to do something, you have to do it. so anyway, and they built it. So he gets here in '46, and really it's the first full year of that studio and that record company. And he records 2 songs, records a single for them, Guitar Blues and something else. And in fact, it's still around. You can find him playing on that.
Was it a hit? I mean, did people respond?
He said he got $22 in royalties.
Ooh. Well, in 1946 money.
Yeah. The key back then was to get it on jukeboxes. The jukeboxes saved the record business, because they're the ones buying the records. And so he's got on some radio station, some jukeboxes. Got a little bit of attention.
He's going to go on to become a producer, a label head, sort of the. Mm-hmm. He discovered a lot of people, didn't he?
Yes, a guy named Steve Scholes was the head of RCA's, what they used to call Race and Hillbilly, and blues and country, we'd say today. And so Steve used him to call musicians to set up sessions. Steve would call down from New York, say, "We're going to record Johnny and Jack. We need some songs. We're going to do that Tuesday and Thursday," and then and he'd have a list of artists on the RCA list to record. So Chet starts by gathering the musicians and then being the session leader. Which, who is a producer? Well, you'd list it as Steve Scholes, because he's the guy in charge. He's signing the checks, and he's setting the pace in the studio. but Chet's doing the musical stuff, and Steve realizes how competent, how good he is at that. So he doesn't jump into producing, he evolves into producing. And then with signing acts, it takes a while because Steve Scholz had to say so. He had to approve the acts. So that's how Elvis got here, Steve Scholz, and then of course connected with Chet later.
Tick off some of the incredible sessions that Chet's guitar is heard on.
Well, of course, with Chet's guitar, you really hear it on the instrumentals. Country Gentleman, Windy and Warm, Mr. Sandman, what's the one? Yakety Yak, Yakety Axe for him. Those where you really hear Chet. A lot of times he would lay out or just play a little bit on like a Jim Reeves session or an Eddie Arnold session. Chet didn't like to play on the sessions because he wanted to concentrate on the song and the session. And if he was playing, then your concentration split on. So you don't hear his guitar as much. I mean, if you know what you're, like the Everly Brothers, if you know what you're listening for,
you can hear it.
You can hear it.
Yeah. How do you go about writing a book like this? I know for years you've been a music journalist, you had access and entree into that world, but you probably weren't thinking, oh, this is for my Chet Atkins book I'm going to do in 30 years. How do you gather your information?
You're talking about writing it, and when people ask me that, I give an answer that sounds like I'm dodging the question. And is not satisfying, but is the most honest answer I can give, and that is, the subject comes to you. That you're thinking about Chet. Of course, everybody's talking about Chet, and then you write a little article. I'd written a Nashville Sound book. Chet's in there. Roger Miller, Chet's in there. I did a book on Eddie Arnold. Chet's in there, and it's just kind of a gradual process, and then one day, you say, you're in, and what it is from there is you go and sit in a room for 8 hours a day and type. And that's how you write a book.
And how often do you stop to spin a song and think, let me listen to that closely so that I know get into the right headspace? I mean, I'm imagining you're listening to a lot of Chet while you're writing about him.
Yeah, and I have students, and they say, "What do you listen to?" They always wonder, "What do you listen to?" And you say, "Well, I listen to what I'm working on." And so, yes, I listened to a whole lot of Chet for a while, and now that's over, I don't listen to him at all.
Well, you got to get away from a certain amount of distance.
Yeah, you do.
Speaking of distance, you came here from Maryland. With just the dream that I want to be a musician, I'm coming to Nashville.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I got a job. I came to Knoxville. I had a girlfriend at the time, and she went off with another guy, so I was looking for... Anyway, and I was wandering around the UT campus, and the journalism department had a thing, and they had kind of an employment thing. Are you, I was looking for a job. So I was in Cookeville. I went to Cookeville, got that job, and I stayed in Cookeville for a year, which is where I met Keith Bilbrey, and we were hanging out. And then I got fired, and I always wanted to be in Nashville.
Fired for what?
It was a strange group. It was a strange group, and they just decided they didn't like me. You had to know the inner dynamics of that bunch.
This is a newspaper, right?
A newspaper. Yeah. And so So I always wanted to come to Nashville, so that was my excuse. I had bought a VW van and built a bed in the back. And I moved to Nashville, and I was basically one of those homeless people. And I never was down at the Mission or anything, but I scrambled along. You sleep on a lot of couches, and as you get to know people. And that's how I got. Yeah, and came to town to be a songwriter, and I said I was a musician. But once I got to Nashville and I heard real musicians, I never said that again. If I'm in Iowa, I might, somebody asks, "Do you play?" I go, "Yeah," if somebody in Nashville asks me, it's not really, not really.
Now, you started writing for Record World?
Started writing for the CMA.
Oh, okay.
I got a job. You're right. I started with Record World. They put together a special issue on country music every year. And I ran into a guy named Dan Beck, who moved to New York now. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, if you can help me, we'll buy you a sandwich every now and then. And that's about what it was. I mean, they call them interns now, but they didn't kind of have all that set up at the time. And, now it's so easy to come to town. You got Belmont University, you got MTSU, you've got bunches of places that it's easy to come in on. They didn't have that at the time. So I got there. And John Sturdivant was the head of Record World. So again, I get into the CMA Award show. I go from being, this street urchin to having access to the top people in all the companies. Kind of odd how that worked out. But that's, by the way, it's an interesting story that Chet, I went to the University of Maryland, was living in the dorm. I just wanted to be in Nashville. I just wanted to be in Nashville ever since I can remember. And so I wrote him a letter and said, I'd like to come down and da-da-da. I get a letter back, special delivery to my dorm room from Chet saying, don't come. Basically, he says, stay in school and finish college. Yeah, so, I never showed it. Well, I lost that letter, but I'd always wanted to show him that sometime, but never did.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is writer Don Cusic. We'll be right back. It's interesting, though, because you point out in the book that Chet Atkins, as genius as he was a bit insecure about his own lack of education. Mm-hmm. So that stay in college maybe was really a sincere plea, not stay away from your kid, but do better for yourself.
Very much. He was a lifetime learner. He read a lot. I remember I went to his house after he died. His granddaughter still lives there. And all these books on World War II, when Paul McCartney came to town, he lent him a book to read. And Mark Twain, he was a big fan of Mark Twain. He was more educated than most people who have a degree, because that's the key to being educated is lifelong learning, self-education. And he had that. But, that's where the CGP thing came from. He wanted some initials to put by his name. He didn't have PhD, so went with CGP.
Which is?
Certified Guitar Player.
Yep. And there are only like a half a dozen or so, because he had to bestow that on you.
Yes.
Who are they?
Steve Warner, Tommy Emmanuel, Paul Yandel, John Knowles, Jerry Reed. It was a Chet honor bestowed by Chet. So,
do you think he enjoyed the record executive part of the game, or would he have been pretty happy just picking guitar?
This is where Chet's big contradiction comes in, because he hated the executive work, the administrative work. He was always complaining. He wanted to play the guitar more. But being in the executive position that he was in, and there can't be a Chet today because you got lawyers in that position or managers. Being in that position, he was a magnet. So all the people came to see him. He was shy. He was very reserved. And so here you have a situation where he could attract the top talent. He could record what he wanted. Steve Scholz had to approve of, and it was mostly an easygoing thing. Eddie Arnold would find a song, and they go, "Yeah, we'll do it," or Chet would find a song for him. It wasn't like you hear it. They were pounding them over the head. You will record this. It wasn't like that at all. So anyway, so Chet has the opportunity to record whatever he wants, spend as much time on it as he wants. He has a studio at his home that he spends hours in, and And so it's a yes and no question, or yes and no answer. He hated the being the executive. At the same time, here's a poor country boy from East Tennessee, and he's a vice president of one of the biggest corporations in the world. I mean, this is something to be proud of. He was proud of it and embarrassed by it at the same time. He didn't think he deserved it. Of course, in New York, you had guys coming out of Harvard and Yale for that.
Yeah. Everyone admired him, too. I mean,
yeah.
George Harrison is playing a Chet-style guitar on the Ed Sullivan Show because that's presumably his idol, right?
Somebody, early in the Beatles, somebody went to Harrison's house and goes up to his bedroom and counts something like 11 Chet Atkins albums. But you brought up something, and that is who Chet is linked to. Okay, Chet is country. You got country. And then he gets linked to jazz, mostly later on when he's playing more jazz. But he's linked to Elvis, the beginnings of rock and roll. I mean, he is at the studio when they're cutting Heartbreak Hotel. And then later, when Chet gets out of the Army, for a while he stays in the studio. He's the Everly Brothers. On their sessions, he's playing a lead guitar. The Beatles, as you mentioned, he comes out and he's playing, George Harrison played a Chet Atkins double cutaway country gentleman guitar. And of course, Paul McCartney, he records with Paul McCartney later. So, I mean, here he is linked with the founders of rock and roll. Now, he never played with Dylan, but who could play with Dylan?
You are a songwriter, a playwright. You're kind of a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
Is that the way you like it?
Well, it's the way it happens. I just get bored easily, I guess. Well, the problem is I'm not really great at anything. And so, if you're not great at one thing, define that one thing, you have to do a whole lot of different things. And that's kind of what I've done.
Yeah, but that's been our gain. 28 books. Which was the most challenging or satisfying when it was done? Challenging
was Chet, and it took 12 years to finish that. Not every day, but 12 years. My favorite, really, and the typical answers, they're all like my children, and I love them all equally. But the Roger Miller book, because I think I got it right. And Roger was one of my heroes. My three big music influences are Hank Williams, Roger Miller, and the Beatles. Because I came of age during the 60s. And so those are the ones I'm most proud of. Those. And I've managed to write books on all of them.
And I know you've also produced records on Bobby Bare, Jeannie Seeley. How did you get that producer hat on? Well,
kind of fell into it. A guy named Shannon Pollard, who is the grandson of Eddie Arnold.
Right.
And he and I were friends, and I helped him get into Belmont. And when Eddie died, he started a record label, Plowboy Records. And he brought me in, and he wanted to do an Eddie Arnold tribute album, and then that led into, and I produced some of that. And it was just from producing demos. I just kind of knew how to do it. And then Bobby Bare came out of that. And then with Jeannie Seeley, I worked with Mike Curb quite a bit. And we were trying to get her into the Hall of Fame. Thought, if we put out a good album, and it kind of worked with Jim Ed Brown, it worked with Bobby Bare, but it kind of stopped with Jeannie. She hasn't gotten into the Hall of Fame, at least yet.
Yeah, she needs to be.
Yeah.
And Jeannie, if you're listening, she's had some health problems, but I know everyone's praying for her and pulling for her. And what a lady.
Yes.
I mean, she's a heck of a songwriter herself.
Yes. Wrote that R&B hit, whose name I can't remember, but she only had really one big hit on her own, Don't Touch Me. I think if she had a little more a couple more of those great big hits, she could go in a lot easier.
Well, we could talk for hours about why it's more difficult for female writers, especially of her generation,
Yeah.
to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Will there always be folks with long, legendary careers like, Roger Miller and Chet, or is the nature of the business a lot more immediate and fast-moving now, where someone's not going to endure for decades?
Chet's been dead 20 years. I have students, I teach up at Belmont, and I'll say, have you ever heard of Chet Atkins? And they'll say, I've heard the name. And you say, tell me what he is. He's a country singer. And this comes up all the time. And I'm not one of those guys, those old guys that says, those kids are all dumb, they're all stupid, they don't know this and they don't know that. I've had a 50-year head start on them. Mm-hmm. But it is kind of disconcerting when they've never heard of somebody that is an important part of your life. They have heard of Bob Dylan and they've heard of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, those kinds of things. But you go back to an Eddie Arnold or an Ernest Tubb, or certainly a Red Foley. Roger Miller, for a while, Roger Miller was real hot because they released that record, that Robin Hood record, or Robin Hood movie, and then dun, 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 all those songs that he did for that. So they would remember that. But it's just, they haven't, when you're asking about a long career, it's just very rare that anybody can have a long career. I mean, unless you have grandchildren, there's nobody going to remember you.
And being around these young people, who have a lot of passion about music, mm-hmm. Has any of it rubbed off on you? Do you like anything you're hearing these days? Have they turned you on to great music?
Oh, yeah. You hear them talking, and you go check on YouTube or Spotify, something like that. A lot of times my listening, I have to do it on purpose. Listening, music used to be just part of your life. It was always playing, and then you'd hear something new on the radio. Radio doesn't break any new acts anymore. You've got to know what's on the yeah. And so it'll come in lumps. There'll be, and I'll actually write them down sometimes, songs and artists, and I'll sit in my office and spend half a day just listening to music. But I don't listen over and over and over again. I kind of listen to find out what's going on and stuff like that. And I used to. Of course, you can do it on Spotify now. I used to have these CDs that I would make for the car. I've got to keep my car because it's got a CD player in it. They don't make them anymore.
Thank you. Mine does too. And that's one of the reasons I keep my car.
Yeah.
Is teaching fun?
Yeah, it is. And of course, I teach a history of the recording industry class. And that is just to expose students to all of the stuff. I mean, we start in 1877 with Edison inventing the phonograph, and to hear that, to hear stuff from the 1920s, to hear that big band sound, and they've never heard it before. There's one guy, I played Patty Page doing Tennessee Waltz. He was just knocked out. He said, "That's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard." I didn't know music could be like that. And here it came out in 48 or so, 50. It came out in 1950. And he wasn't even aware of it. So that's what you get when you get older.
When the class says, what is your favorite recording ever?
Mm-hmm.
What do you play for them?
I really don't play anything. I tell them about Hank Williams and Roger Miller and the Beatles. And then there's, for an album to listen to, I got an old Hoagie Carmichael album that I like. And so I'll put that on, and it's got Old Buttermilk Sky and some of these old great songs of his. I kind of like that. But I go back to my roots. I still play Roger Miller, still have Hank Williams, still play the Beatles. So really, when I kind of want to just kind of kick back, it's those guys, the guys that I connected with when I was young. When
you were in that VW van, what happened to that thing?
Oh my God, I have no idea.
Don't you wish you still had it though?
No. Well,
no, thank you.
It might fit in a museum or something. I don't know what happened to it. I sold it, maybe $100, and I was getting more money. I was making more money, and so I could afford a car. Because the starter wouldn't work. You had to park on a hill all the time.
To get a rolling start?
To get a rolling start, put it in second gear, and if you didn't start then, you were in trouble.
Banner & Company is a production of the new Nashville Banner. This episode was produced, edited, and mixed by Steve Haruch. Original music is by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. Great. We've got a little tradition here on Banner & Company. The final question is in the fishbowl. Your choice. Luck of the draw.
It says, door number 3, from Stephen Womack. What was a moment
in your life when you took an entirely unexpected direction?
Boy, I don't know. There's so many of them. Working for record labels, no. I don't know how to answer that. There's been so many shifts in going in different directions, but totally unexpected. I always knew where I wanted to end up. And so I kind of always looked at, and the path may have been wiggly, but I always knew where I wanted to be. Now, I didn't have it all specific. I didn't, the office at my address. But I always knew where I wanted to end up, which is kind of where I am now, being able to write books and be part of the country music establishment. And the only time you feel guilty about sometimes is all these people in the world are starving, and here I am writing about country music when, look at the mess in Uganda or something. So, but no, I always knew where I was headed.